So now that you have a good understanding of inversions and you've played your inversion shapes on the low 3 strings, what about the other strings? Well, the good news is our next set of 3 strings, which are strings 5, 4, and 3, use the exact same shape that we used on the low 3 strings. So if we start here, that would be a D. So this is going to be a D chord, right? And we're going to go there, there, and there. Same exact shape as we used on the A. So we're going to move that up to here for our first inversion and up to here for our second inversion. Same shapes. So let's play the inversions off of the 4th string. So we'll keep it here put our root note on the 5th fret. So that would be here, right? That would be our first note, which is going to be G. So this is going to be a G chord. That is my 1 and my 3 and my 5 of my G chord. So that's my root position G chord. If I move up here, that's going to be my first inversion. And up here will give me my second inversion. So the same principle as I used before. Root inversion as the root note on the bottom. My first inversion is going to have the root on top. The third will be on the bottom. And then my second inversion is the root in the middle with this guy, the 5th on the bottom, right? So when we're doing those, we want to think about patterns and how I can move those all over the neck. That will be the key. And show you a little bit about that, about how to think about which ones to go to. Why should you use one inversion instead of the other? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's do the top 3 strings. My top 3 strings would start here on my C note. So this is going to be a C chord inversion. This is going to be my root inversion, my root position. And this next one is going to be right here. And the next one is going to be right here. Now, one thing you might notice if you're really paying attention is that, like, if I play a G bar chord here, several of the inversions are within there. So the shapes are there. My G was right here, right? This top C is right here as a G chord. This one is right here. So many of these inversions are just partial chunks of a regular bar chord or a chord that you may already know. So be mindful of that as you're playing. So if I want to go up here and play this B chord, I may just play this part of it. Or I may play this part of it. Or I may play this part of it. If I do play this part of it, right, that would tell me that the next inversion is right up there. So sometimes having one spot where you sort of anchor your thinking helps you follow it around. Now, why do we want to play all of these different inversions? Why know all these different chords? Well, there are a couple reasons. Number one, if you're in a different place on the neck, you don't want to always have to go back to this. If this is the only G chord you don't want to always have to run back to that G chord. We may want to play a G up here if we're playing some. That chord goes with that scale part right there. So we may want to experiment with knowing our chord shapes by knowing our inversions in different places on the neck. The other thing that's really cool that I find I use inversions a lot for, and that is coming up with different parts, right? Interesting parts, because we can play the major chords. And of course, all of those chord shapes I just played have the minor chord, just like we did with our 3 low strings. We just flat the 3rd, right? So you can take and make that G a minor there. You'll find all of that information in the charts that are provided with this course. So you'll be able to see your minor shapes, but you should be able to figure it out by now because you understand chords pretty well. But one thing I really like to do is play over a chord progression with different inversions to make it a little bit more interesting. So we may have a chord progression, and especially if you're playing with another guitar player, he may be playing right? Or something like that, which is like standard progression. Once again, a lot of theory, and especially street theory, where we're really thinking about how can we make this more interesting, is based on the premise that we're going to be playing over some things that are pretty straightforward. I wouldn't want to call them boring, but they're, pretty standard stuff. So we're trying to come up with ways and understand the neck in ways that allow us to make it more interesting. So over that, for example, I might take a look at what I could do with some inversion shapes over there. So instead of playing this G when he's playing that G, no sense in both of us playing the same thing, I might play this G. And instead of just strumming it as a chord, I might pick through it. So I've got a track with just those 3 chords going on, and I'm gonna go ahead and play that, and then I'll play some inversion shapes over the top of that. And you'll hear what I mean. So you'll hear it's a great tool to have in your arsenal to be able to play over static chord progressions, especially if you're playing with another guitar player. So here's our chord progression: G, D, C. Really standard. So I could play those chords, but that would be pretty boring. What if I did this instead and played this inversion and went D, C, G, D. Back to the original. This D, this C, this G, this D. I could strum those chords if I wanted to just I could do whatever I wanted on different places on the neck by just finding those intervals, or finding those inversion shapes, right? So if I find the inversion that I like, and then I know what the next one is going to be, I can lead into it. I don't have to play all of the notes, right? So I can actually do basically intervals within those inversions. That gives me a lot of cool ground to cover when I'm trying to play with another guitar player. So remember, when we're dealing with inversions, you can invert any chord. Now, we've just dealt with triads and basically our major and minor chords, but you can invert dominant 7s, major 7s, minor 7s. You can invert a dominant 13th chord, right? There's a lot of different options you have when you start looking at all these cool chords. When you go watch your favorite guitarist play, and it seems like, man, they're flying all over the neck. They're playing chords all over. How do they know all those chords? Or more importantly, how could they fit all of those chords into this song when I play this song, the chart just says, play these 3 chords, but it doesn't sound like they're just playing those 3 chords. Well, a lot of times what they're doing is they are playing those 3 chords, but they're using a lot of different inversions. They're playing with some of these cool little interval moves. There's a lot more going on there. So that's really where street theory comes into play. It's showing you how to take something pretty simple and make it really interesting. So check out all the charts we've included, because we give you a lot of options to make your playing more interesting with inversions.